Hi everybody. Today we are going to take a trip around the world. I did a lot of work on a lot of tanks the other day, and so we're going to walk around the room and have a look at all of them. So we're going to start here at my Waterfall Tank, and this is one of the tanks that I did not really do anything at all to. I've topped off the water, but that's about it. The water got cloudy after the last water change I did. I did a lot of moam removal. I got my gravel vac in there, and while I don't really scrunch it down into the gravel so much, it just piles up in this tank. I don't have any real strong current or water flow in this tank, which would cause the moam to get picked up by the hang on the back filter you can see on the right hand side there. And so most of the moam just sort of settles to the bottom, and from time to time I'll get in there and I'll do a big vac when I do a water change, and I'll just suck a bunch of that out of there and remove it. And whenever I do that, it really does seem to disrupt the nitrogen cycle or something. I always get cloudy water after I do it. So that is part of what I've been saying over time for a while now, about how I'm beginning to realize that moam is actually not a bad thing at all. In fact, in a lot of cases, it can be your friend. And so we still will talk about that in an upcoming video. I do want to talk a little more specifically about moam in a few of my other tanks too, so we will get to that one of these days. That will be a topic of a video. In the meantime, the whole point is since the nitrogen cycle has been slightly and gently disrupted, I'm leaving the tank alone. I'm just kind of letting it sit. So we haven't really done any work at all to this tank. If you're not familiar with it, I will quickly go over that we've got some plants growing in there that are doing well. The Java fern I put down here is doing alright. The Creeping Jenny is doing what it usually does when I plant it in front of this LED down here in my basement. Is it does well at first, it grows really fast, and then the leaves starting getting more and more compacted, meaning it's getting probably more light than it should, and then it starts sort of going the other direction and looking a little dry and peaked and shriveled up, and that's kind of where we are now. The plant that is a low light plant, you can see these little green bits here and these couple little green bits here, not this Creeping Jenny, not this bright green stuff, but if you see this darker green, that is the stuff. Actually, these are little clovers that have just come up from the leaves. This is the stuff I got from the reservoir. It's a low light plant. That's why I've had it covered most of the time. I uncovered it just for the sake of this video. It will get covered up again when I'm done. But it's alive, it's hanging in there, it's not doing much, so I'm not too concerned about that. I'm probably not even going to worry about covering it back up because it's ugly. You know, it's an eyesore covering it up to keep it alive. You can't even see it when it's covered, and then when I do uncover it, it's barely even there, so there's kind of no point in really keeping it. That was more of an experiment than anything. So that's about all that's going on with the Waterfall Tank. My foot tank down here is nice and crystal clear. I do have at least 2 adult-sized shrimp in there. So for people that have been asking me if there's still any shrimp left in this tank, there are at least 2 adult-sized shrimp still in this tank. And this is another one that whenever we get around to doing that moam video, we're going to talk about this tank. You can see the depth of the moam in there. I mean, it's almost up to the water's edge in some parts of the tank, and of course once the water level starts getting down, the water level does actually get down to here sometimes in this tank, and so that moam actually sort of spreads out and fills that whole top section in. The moam is thick in this tank, and whenever I do a vacuuming in this tank and remove a bunch of moam, I get the same sort of cloudy water, and it definitely affects the tank for several days if I get in there and really remove a lot of that moam. So I think that moam is part of the nitrogen cycle once it starts building up like that, but again, we'll talk more about that later. So let's get the lights turned off on this tank now, and then that will reduce the glare as we walk around and look at some of the other tanks in the room. We're going to start with my 29 Miscellaneous here. Another tank that I did not do anything to, didn't even top this one off, as you can probably tell by that big gap at the top. I like my tanks to not really have that big gap in the between where the water and the top black plastic bar on the tank is. I like it to be water all the way to the top, and so you can see this one was definitely in need of a top off. It's probably in need of a water change. It's been a while since I've done one. I have got the filters swapped out not too long ago, so the filters are running nice. Other than that, you know, not much going on. This tank is one of my tanks that always just sort of ticks over like a clock. That angelfish there is just absolutely stunning. That is, of course, the feature fish in this tank. Got some loaches on the bottom, some guppies swimming around. I got some red-blue Colombian tetras in there. Got some black skirt tetras in there. And again, everything in there is sort of just ticking over like a clock. So we will move on to my 55-gallon gourami tank. Now, this is a tank that I got in and did a lot of work to. I cleaned out the filter, which was, you know, it was pretty gross and filthy, but it wasn't the worst I've ever seen. It wasn't disgusting, so, well, I guess that depends on what your idea of disgusting is. But it wasn't the worst I've ever seen, and it wasn't that big of a deal, so I didn't bother getting any video about it. But I got in there, I got the glass all wiped down. I removed a little bit more of that Java moss that's just getting all overgrown. I took out some of the floating water sprite, let them a little more light in the tank, and I got all of the glass wiped down. So the only question about this tank is still the quality of that LED. And, you know, you can see when we get up close and look at some of these gouramis, they've got some amazing color on them already, even under that really low quality LED. So if I was to put a better quality light on here, I really wonder how much difference would it make. I paid $12 for the LED shop light that we've got on this tank, and again, it does a pretty good job of showing you just how colorful these gouramis can be. But what would a good, true, full spectrum, you know, what would it look like under that? I don't know, but I wonder. Anyway, maybe someday we'll find out. But that's all that's going on in this tank. No new fish, no nothing. This is the tank that I keep referring to when I say that I'm going to bring those yo-yo loaches I have in the other room. This is the tank they're going to end up in. And I do have a bunch of loaches on the bottom already. And so they will just get in and get along swimmingly, I'm sure. So moving on to my 55-gallon tank. This is another one that's not a lot to talk about. This is one of those tanks that's just kind of waiting for me to get around to doing something with it. I kind of keep on top of the maintenance, and that's about it. I've got two big, sort of scraggly looking piles of Anubias in here. They're both very old plants, but they are definitely in need of some manicuring and some trimming up. I want to rescape the tank. I need to create more hiding spaces in the bottom. I've got a, oh, we can actually see him right now almost, and it doesn't look good. I shot a video of this guy the other day. There's a bumblebee, South American bumblebee catfish back there lying up on the leaves, and it keeps showing up with sort of like white markings on its head, not like ick or anything like that. I don't know, it just doesn't look good, and it's not very plump. It's in there wiggling around now. So it just doesn't have enough spaces to hide. I mean, I need to just, if nothing else, just get in there and throw some rocks on the bottom in the time being just to give it a place to hide. Because again, it just does not look good to me. I shot a video the other day where it was laying out in plain sight. It was actually laying right here on this little section of wood. And the tips of its fins are looking a little ragged, and it just doesn't look good all the way around. So it's time to get in and do something about this tank. Because again, if you look at the bottom, there's just not a lot of places to hide down there, really. And I also have a Synodontis catfish on the bottom that does find places to hide, and I think that one is responsible for chasing that little South American bumblebee out. And that's why, instead of hiding in the shadows like it should be, it's trying to hide up here in the bushes, which is not normal behavior for one of those. They should be on the bottom in a little cave or something. So I need to get in here and do something about that. Trying to back up without tripping over anything. So I got the room all set up for my live stream the other night. Don't forget, I do a live stream every Friday night and Sunday night at 8. And then occasionally I will do an impromptu live stream, like when we got in here and cleaned up my 40 breeder. So this tank, if you're not familiar with it, sat here looking really, really rough for a really, really long time. And I kept saying one of these days we'll get in here and we'll get it cleaned up. And I finally did. I finally got motivated, and we got in there and we got it cleaned up, and it looks so good. It looks fantastic. I know there's still some blackbeard algae growing in there, and this clump in particular right here is where it's worst. But that doesn't bother me. It does, whatever. It's just some blackbeard algae growing in the tank. That doesn't bother me. You can see all that green. You can see all that beautiful woodwork. You can see how I've opened up all of the plants, so they're going to start greening and reddening up again. I've got Java in there. I've got Crypt in there. I've got little tiny baby dwarf Anubias in there. I've got a variety of stuff from way back in the day when I was a little more enthusiastic about trying to get different plants to grow in the tank. But you can see how thoroughly that Java fern has rooted into that piece of wood. I mean, it's sending out tendrils like out through the wood further down. Those aren't really babies that attach to it. They sort of come out of the wood, so you know the roots are down in there really good. So yesterday we went out to PetSmart and I got half a dozen nearite snails. And you can see a few of them in there doing their thing. So nearite snails should eat the blackbeard algae, and that's my main goal for putting them in there, is I want to get that blackbeard algae tidied up. I don't care if there's some in there, I just don't want it to be all over everything. So I guess this will be a good little test area. You can see how thick that blackbeard algae is. All that dark stuff on the on that sort of tan colored rock, that's all blackbeard algae, and that snail's right next to it. So we'll see if it doesn't get down there and start munching on that, because that would be a feast for it if it does eat it. You can see that one is up here, and it does look indeed like it is eating the blackbeard algae off of this Anubias, because this big chunk of Anubias right here, believe it or not, that is Anubias. That also had a lot of blackbeard algae left on it that I couldn't really get off without breaking the Anubias up. And I put a couple of the snails on it when I dropped them in there, and you can see one is still on there, and it looks like it's getting it cleaned up. So that gives me hope that the blackbeard algae in this tank is going to get under control. Again, I'm not trying to eradicate it. I think it looks fine. It just has to be within reason, and that's the key, is keeping it balanced. So hopefully those nearite snails will help me do that. So moving on, my 125-gallon New World tank. Just got in here and did a really big water change yesterday. Try to get a little look at my spotted tilapia Flo. She is a beautiful fish. She really is. Look how gorgeous she is. So this is my New World tank technically, but she is a West African fish. There's a whole story behind how I got her. She basically came from one of my viewers in Florida. I didn't know what it was. I got her as a tiny little thing, and I thought it was a sunfish, and I threw it in my tank, and of course as she grew I found out that she was definitely not a sunfish, and eventually I learned she was a spotted tilapia, and now she's come being full grown here in the tank. It's not often that she sits so still and just lets me get video of her like this. She's just beautiful, posing in the light like that. That is really unusual. She normally dashes and hides back in her corner. If you look at the bottom of the tank, you'll notice how all the gravel's been spread out, and you can see all the egg crate plastic that I have under there protecting the glass. That's all her. She kicks all that gravel out of there and opens that whole area up. So I'm thrilled that she's just letting me shoot video of her like this. I'd like to be able to come down and just shoot an actual video of her one day and have her cooperate like this. So there you go. There's a look at my spotted tilapia. That is my bluegill sunfish. This one's getting really big too. And it's interesting how calm the fish are with me standing right in front of the tank like this. Normally they either get really excited like it's going to be feeding time, or they go and hide. So if we look down here, and of course you can see I got nearite snails in this tank too. I love nearite snails. They're worth their weight in gold when it comes to help keeping your tank clean. The big silvery fish in the front there is a golden shiner. The small silver dollars are spotted silver dollars. The large silver dollars are just regular old standard model silver dollars. There's that golden shiner again. Of course, there's a better look at my bluegill. And I got a few others in the tank that aren't making an appearance at the moment. I got a white suckerfish. I got a big pleco in the tank. And I've got a creek chub in here somewhere that's good and fat. But it looks like none of them are going to make an appearance. So there you go, just a look at the 125 gallon New World tank. Again, I did get in there and do a lot of water change the other day, but that's all it really was a big water change. I removed probably about 60% of the water and then wiped the glass down and filled it back up. I didn't mess with the filter or anything, do anything to the tank or whatever. It just got a really big water change, and you can still see how tannin stained that water is even after water change the size I just described. So moving on to my snail tank. This is another one that has a lot of mulm in the bottom of it. And so this will probably eventually get included in that mulm video if I ever get around to shooting the mulm video. But it's just a snail tank. It grows snails, which is super easy. Just any old kind of water. I have a little bit of water movement so it doesn't go completely gross and stagnant. I have sort of a natural filter of Java moss. I just cleaned it out the other day, but that will be growing back thick at some point. And that's it. Just a little bit of tiny bit of water circulation to keep it from being stagnant and stinking and gross. And then you just throw lots and lots of fish food in the tank, and the snails will just do their thing and breed like crazy, and you'll have snails galore if you want to use those snails to feed other fish. So moving on to my native tank. This is a 40 breeder, open topped obviously. All these roots you can see off to this side here are roots from the Anubias. You can see back here coming up and over. And it is doing really well. It's actually growing all the way back there now. So the Anubias in this tank is doing really well. And then all of the roots you can see right there in the front, those are from this broadleaf water sprite that just kind of, a piece of it got stuck in the rocks right there. And I noticed one day that some roots were starting to develop off of it, and so I left it alone, and that's what we have ended up with, is all those beautiful roots flowing in the water. That's probably the thing I like most about water sprite, is the roots that it develops and that beautiful root system that hangs in the water. So that's what you can get if you've got a floating water sprite in a tank with fish that do not eat vegetation. I've got, gouramis and those silver dollars, so none of them ever allow any kind of root system, because those roots are probably tender and delicious to those fish, and they just never survive. And that's a lot of the reason the plants don't survive, is the roots just get devoured, and then the plant itself can't, there's no roots for them to live. So my crayfish in this tank, as far as I know, I still have at least one. I saw it the other day. It was hiding down here under its little cave. It had no big claws. It had its little front feeding claws, but it did not have any big claws left on it. So I'm not sure what that was all about. Some of the fish maybe got to it while it was soft shell and nipped its claws or something. It's possible the other crayfish got to it while it was soft shell, but I haven't seen both crayfish in a long time, so I do not know for sure if there's still two crayfish in here. I know as of a few days ago there was still at least one crayfish in here, but I can't guarantee there's still two. Other than that, again, we get a little glimpse of the fish swimming around here and there. My view, when I stand up, I'm looking down like this, so I don't really see much of anything except a lot of duckweed floating on the surface. And then, of course, I get to see all this beautiful, the little bit of the waterfall and the snails crawling up on the piece of woodwork. I've got all of the moss growing back there. Of course, this is a huge broadleaf water sprite, and I keep calling it broadleaf water sprite, and if you don't believe me, this is what it looks like when it's in the water, which is definitely the broadleaf water sprite. And then once it grows up and emergent and it comes out of the water, this is the exact same plant. And again, you can see the babies right there. You can see how they are broadleaf, little tiny offspring. So the plantlets are broadleaf. That's what it looks like. This is how it looks when it's still just starting to come up out of the water. Definitely broadleaf, and then it changes over and looks like almost like it's a fern or a pine or something. Well, it is a fern technically, so I guess it looks normal to come looking like this when it gets out of the water, because water sprite is actually a type of fern. So there you go. Alright, moving on to my 125 gallon tank. We did a lot of work in here the other day too. I got in there and trimmed a lot of that red tiger lotus out of there. But we will come back over around this way where we can get an actual look at the whole tank. Probably should have taken my bottles of food off the top of it first, but impromptu spur of the moment video, that's what you get sometimes. Anyway, that is a look at the whole tank. I really need to get in there and thin out that mass of Java moss. It's just getting so ridiculously thick. It looks amazing. It really does. I love it. I get compliments on it all the time. People mistake it for a nubius and all sorts of things. People, I mean, swords. That's not a sword. That is a Java fern. And it's just so massive. I really need to get in there. It goes almost to the back of the tank. I'm a little more aggressive with how much I remove from the backside because of the water flow. I do have a power head down there on the bottom, and it, you know, basically blows the water down across the back of the tank, and it stops the flow. I mean, it really does prevent the flow. In fact, if we look in here, you can see, I guess you can see that little bit of glob of stuff floating on the surface there, the bubbles and whatnot. It's just still. There's hardly any water movement at all. And I've got, you know, a Sun 125 gallon per hour power head, or 525 gallon per hour power head, you know, filter running. And I've got a 1500 gallon per hour power head running down there in the corner. Now, I will grant you, it does have some plants and stuff stuck to it, so it's probably not running at full capacity, but it's definitely moving a lot of water across the bottom and back side of that tank. And yet, when we get up here into this corner, because of this, it's just almost stagnant in that corner. You know, down here, you get a little tiny bit of movement. If the tank's really flowing properly, you'll see a little bit of movement on the red tiger lotus, because that stuff's real fine. I mean, if you notice, as the fish swim around in there, even the movement from the fish causes the pads to move around in the water. So you can tell there's not a whole lot of water flow going on in this tank right now, just by how still all of the plants are. You get here in the center, and you get a little bit of movement on some of the plants that are right directly in front of the power head, but that's about it. And so all this crypt in there, as thick as all that is, and it's time to get in there and really thin the plants out in this tank. It's just not, you know, it's not tenable to keep it this way. I need more water circulation, but I've also been saying that for quite a long time. So I don't know, we'll see. So when I did the water change the other day, I got in, I got the filter cleaned out, I got all the glass wiped down, I removed some of the red tiger lotus as we talked about, and I got in, and some of my regular viewers will remember, you can see all that sort of dark green cyanobacteria that's in there. I removed a lot of that with my hand, just, you know, literally just got in there and scraped a bunch of the slimy stuff off of the leaves as much as I could, and then I sprayed it all down with hydrogen peroxide. While the tank was, you know, low, water level was low, I took the water level like way down to here. I mean, it was really low. So while that was all exposed, I sprayed it with the hydrogen peroxide, refilled the tank. I'm not recommending using hydrogen peroxide. I know what I'm doing with it. I learned the hard way over the years, but I do use hydrogen peroxide safely from time to time for very specific purposes in my tanks, and that was one of them. So we'll see if that doesn't help beat back that cyanobacteria a little bit. I wasn't trying to eradicate it necessarily, but if it's exposed like that and I can just physically remove some and then get it sprayed with a little bit of hydrogen peroxide, that won't be a bad thing. So moving on to my deep sand bed tank. Still not really seeing any kind of results. I always sort of forget that this whole purpose of this tank was to find out if we could get some denitrification going with the deep sand bed. And so far, I'm not getting anything. We're right around getting to that 6 month or so time frame where it should be happening if it was going to happen. And so far I'm not seeing anything that indicates anything other than a normal functioning of a tank. So we're not going to worry about that for now. As far as the tank itself goes, I finally think I got the cyanobacteria out of this tank for good. It doesn't seem like it's coming back. I used the Ultra Life this time instead of the ChemiClean, and it looks like it did a pretty good job. I did a big double dose. I kept the air stone in the tank for several days, or actually several weeks after the last treatment, and all I've got now is a bunch of that weird fuzzy hair algae stuff that's growing all over everything. I mean, you can see how thick it is on the Anubias there, and even that log is looking strangely shaggy. And again, don't mind it, but it's got to be within reason. It's, you know, it can't be completely out of control, and it's actually starting to come back under control, because that's not bad looking. I don't mind that. I know some of you might think that that's hideous and ugly and all, but I don't mind that at all. That looks beautiful to me. That looks absolutely natural and perfect and wonderful. It's just, it's got to be within reason. And we're getting it back to within reason, as I said. And the reason we're getting it back to within reason is, if it'll focus on it or not, right there in the center of your screen, you can see a nearite snail in the glass. I put 4 or 5 nearite snails. There's another one you can see on the glass right underneath that piece of wood. If you see these clean patches on the wood where the wood is nice and, you know, visible through all the green, that's from nearite snails cleaning the algae away from it. So now that they're in here, this tank is slowly going to get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And at some point, I'm not even going to have all that beautiful, natural, shaggy growth. I mean, that to me just looks like a piece of wood I'd find lying in a pond or something with a little bit of stream flowing nearby, a little bit of fresh water flowing past it. Give you a little bit of movement and motion on all of that shaggy growth in there. That's just fantastic to me. I don't think that looks bad at all. The German blue rams that are in here are still doing well. You can kind of see one hiding in the back there. They have still paired off. I mean, they definitely pal around together and do their thing all the time, but I've never seen any activity that indicates they seem to be spawning. And all those little tiny redfish you see swimming around in there are ember tetras. Cool little fish, but I did lose one of them the other day. I found it stuck to the filter intake, and its belly was enormous. So it looked to me like it was egg bound, and probably died from being egg bound. It didn't have that same distinct look as being constipated. It looked more gravid, or, you know, pregnant is not the right word for an animal that has eggs in it. Gravid is the correct word, full of eggs. And that's what she looked like. It just looked like completely egg bound, and that's probably what was the end of her. So this week, or this video I should say at least, we do have something to talk about with my quarantine tank. I did lose one of my red wag platies in there, and I feel really bad about it. It was, I saw its body. It was sort of against this rock. The rock was up against the glass more, and the dead body had sort of floated down to the bottom and stuck between the rock and the glass. And I didn't do anything about it. I figured I'd get to it, and, you know, I forgot about it. The next day I came in and saw it, and I was like, oh yeah, I need to get to that. And when I went to pull it out, the fish was still alive. It had just wiggled its way down in there and gotten stuck, and had been stuck in there that whole time. And apparently it was wriggling around trying to get out, and in doing so, it had basically worn all of its fins off to just little stumps, and it was all scraped up. And when I tried to put it back in the tank and let it, you know, recover, it was pretty clear that it was beyond, you know, recovery. So I went ahead and euthanized it and flushed that one. So if I'd just gotten in there as soon as I saw it and pulled it out, I would have immediately seen that it was still alive, and it would be still alive now. So once again, that was my carefree attitude of whatever, I'll get to it when I get to it. And again, the fish wasn't dead, it was simply stuck. So I've now moved the piece of rock away from the glass, and hopefully we won't have any more issues with anybody else getting wedged in between those two things. Other than that, that floating log in there is part of an experiment for seeing whether or not woodwork has any effect on the development or consumption of nitrate. We'll talk about that later. The new fish you can see right here on the right hand side of your screen is my new jewel cichlid. That's why we've got the quarantine tank all nice and cleaned up. had a new fish to actually put in quarantine this time. And it's still pretty pale and washed out. You know, it is a PetSmart fish, so, or a Petco fish rather. So I don't know if it's even going to live long enough to make it out of quarantine, but it certainly looked healthy enough in their tank, and it has seemed healthy enough in this tank so far, but it just doesn't really have any color. I don't know why it's so washed out like that. Maybe it needs to be in a group of them before its colors will really shine, because it looked more colorful in the Petco tank than it does in this tank. And this tank is, you know, could be its forever home for all it knows. You know, it's got, there's no other fish stressing it out. There's caves for it to hide on, or, you know, there's places for it to hide in the bottom. It gets plenty of food. And for whatever reason, it's less colorful now than it was in the other store. So, I don't know. We'll see. Again, maybe I need to have a little group of them together in order for the color to really come out. But so far, interesting fish. I enjoy its behavior. It's active. It's feeding. It looks at me when I come in. It seems to know who feeds it already. Very clever fish. But it's just really pale and washed out, and that always concerns me if after several days of having it in quarantine it still looks that washed out. So we'll see. Time will tell. Moving on to my brackish tank. Stood up too fast there. Gotta let myself stop being dizzy for a second. Let me get my forward light turned on here, because we did get in this tank. This is another one I did a lot of work to. So, as you probably know, I have two lights on this tank. One is the main light that stays on all the time. The second one is on the forward section of the tank, and that's the light I turn on when I'm shooting video as now, or if I'm doing a feeding video with my camera in the tank. I do those from time to time. If you're not familiar with my butterbean feeding videos, you can check out my brackish tank playlist or my tank cam playlist, and you will see videos from actually inside the tank. So I got in here and did a really big water change the other day. Did 15 gallons, which is a lot for this tank. I usually just do a 5-gallon bucket and call it good. But this time I really wanted to clean it out. There was so much of that red cyanobacteria growing all over everything in here that I spent most of my time just trying to get that out of the tank. Once I got as much of that as I felt comfortable getting out, I went back and vacuumed a bunch of the dead shells and everything off the bottom. Of course, I had a carpet of that red cyanobacteria growing on the bottom, and I vacuumed as much of that off as I could. You can see right there in the front I missed some of it, and in the back, if you look back there, you can see I missed quite a lot of it because I can hardly really even get to it back there. But I did get a lot of it out of the tank. I mean, I got a disgusting amount of it out of the tank. And if you're not familiar with that red cyanobacteria, it smells roughly like a wet dog lying on damp newspaper in a musty root cellar. If you can imagine what that smells like, then you got a pretty good idea of what that red cyanobacteria smells like. So cleaning this tank up was not a lot of fun on the old whiffer there. But we got it cleaned up. It's looking good-ish, looking better, I should say. And I'm considering doing a ultralife or possibly a chemi-clean treatment on this tank just to see how effective it would be at cleaning up that last little bit of red slime cyanobacteria in there. Once I had done the water change, I put mostly fresh water back in, and I took the salinity down to the lowest level I've ever had it. I had it down to 1.001. It barely registered on my refractometer as having any kind of salinity at all. And Butterbean did not seem happy. He was swimming around the tank, acting all kind of weird and up and down and fussing around. And I've never really seen him acting that way. I've seen him overly excited. He just jumps and splashes and he zips up and down, you know, when he gets anxious doing water changes and stuff like that. But he looked like he was in distress the other day. He looked like he was trying to get out of the tank, like through the glass, like he was swimming right at it. Like he was just trying to plow his way through it or something. It was weird. I've never seen him behave that way before. So that's when I checked the salinity. I saw that it was, you know, very, very low for what this tank normally sits at. And so I honestly haven't even measured it. I just mixed up a handful. I just eyeballed up a small handful of salt, put it in some hot water and dissolved it, and then poured that into the tank. and he's been acting pretty normal ever since. So I think I found the sweet spot where he likes to be, and it's just at that very, very low end of not quite brackish, but almost brackish, like at 1.002 or maybe 1.003 specific gravity is where he likes to be. So he seems to be acting normal now, but that's what's been going on in this tank. And no, I did not get in and do anything with the filter. I just did the big water change, got all that stuff out of there, vacuumed up the gravel, or sand in this case, I should say. And of course, I wiped down the glass so we could see in there. It had that red cyanobacteria all over the glass as well. So there we are, all the way back to where we started. If you're still with me, I'm going to say thanks for watching all that. Don't forget, I do a live stream every Friday and Sunday at 8 p.m. And I do a private live stream for my members only on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. So if you want to join that basic membership for $2.99 a month, you will get access to that Wednesday live stream as well, if that's something you're into. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you real soon in the next one.